Sarah Martinez had always been the type of person who preferred blending into the background. At 28, she worked as a librarian at the downtown public library, a job that suited her quiet nature perfectly. She lived alone in a modest apartment with her rescue cat, Whiskers, and spent most evenings reading or working on her small garden on the fire escape. That Tuesday morning started like any other. Sarah woke up at 6:30, fed Whiskers, and got ready for work. She chose her usual attire, comfortable jeans, a loose-fitting sweater, and her favorite sneakers. The weather was pleasant, so she decided to walk the 15 blocks to work instead of taking the bus. It was a decision that would change her life in ways she never could have imagined. The downtown area was bustling with morning commuters. Coffee shops were filled with people grabbing their daily caffeine fix, street vendors were setting up their carts, and the familiar sounds of city life filled the air. Sarah enjoyed these morning walks because they gave her time to think and observe the world around her without feeling pressured to interact with anyone. As she approached the library, she noticed a commotion near the main entrance. A group of teenagers, probably around 16 or 17 years old, were hanging around the steps. They were laughing loudly and seemed to be up to something mischievous. Sarah hesitated for a moment, considering whether to use the side entrance instead, but she didn't want to be late for work. The teenagers were part of a local group that had been causing minor troubles around the neighborhood for weeks. They called themselves the Downtown Crew and thought they were quite clever with their pranks. Most of their activities involved harmless but annoying stunts designed to get reactions from adults. They would film these encounters and post them on social media, hoping to gain followers and attention. As Sarah walked past them, trying to mind her own business, she could hear them whispering and giggling among themselves. She felt uncomfortable but continued walking, hoping they would leave her alone. Unfortunately, that wasn't going to be the case. The leader of the group, a tall boy named Jake, had been looking for the perfect target for their next video. When he saw Sarah walking by herself, looking nervous and avoiding eye contact, he decided she would be perfect. He whispered something to his friends, and they all started moving closer to her. Sarah was just a few steps away from the library entrance when she felt someone grab her arm. She turned around, startled, to find herself surrounded by the group of teenagers. They all had their phones out, recording her reaction. "Hey lady, we're doing a social experiment," Jake said with a smirk. "We just need you to participate for a minute." Sarah tried to pull away, but there were too many of them blocking her path. Her heart started racing, and she could feel panic setting in. She had always been afraid of confrontation, and this situation was her worst nightmare. "I really need to get to work," she said quietly, hoping they would let her go. But the teenagers just laughed and moved in closer. What happened next occurred so quickly that Sarah barely had time to process it. One of the boys, following Jake's lead, suddenly grabbed the waistband of her jeans and yanked them down with force. The action was so unexpected and violent that Sarah stumbled backward, trying to maintain her balance while also attempting to pull her pants back up. The group erupted in laughter, continuing to film as Sarah struggled with her clothing. Other pedestrians started to notice what was happening, but most people just stared in shock rather than intervening. Sarah felt completely humiliated and vulnerable, standing there in the middle of a busy street with her pants around her ankles. But then, something strange happened. The laughter stopped abruptly. The teenagers, who had been so amused by their prank just seconds before, suddenly went completely silent. Even the people who had been walking by started to stop and stare, not with amusement or shock, but with something that looked like awe or disbelief. Sarah didn't understand what was happening at first. She was too focused on trying to get her pants back up and escape the situation. But, as she looked around at the faces surrounding her, she realized that everyone was staring at her lower back, which had been exposed when her sweater rode up during the struggle. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. Sarah could feel dozens of eyes on her, and the weight of their stares made her feel even more exposed than she had moments before. She wanted to run away, but her legs felt frozen in place. Jake, who had been the ringleader of the prank, was the first to speak. His voice was barely above a whisper, and all traces of his earlier bravado were gone. "Oh my God," he said, lowering his phone. "I'm so sorry." We didn't know. The other teenagers started backing away, looking ashamed and confused. Some of them were putting their phones away without even stopping their recordings. A few people in the crowd started to approach Sarah, asking if she was okay and if she needed help. Sarah was completely bewildered by the sudden change in everyone's behavior. She managed to pull her pants back up and adjust her sweater, but she still didn't understand why everyone was looking at her with such intensity. She could feel that something on her back had caused this reaction, but she had no idea what it could be. An elderly woman approached her carefully, speaking in a gentle voice. "Dear, are you all right? Do you need someone to call for help?" Sarah shook her head, still too confused and embarrassed to speak properly. She just wanted to get inside the library and away from all the staring faces. "What's wrong with everyone?" she finally managed to ask. "Why is everyone looking at me like that?" The elderly woman exchanged glances with a few other people in the crowd before speaking again. "Honey, I think you might want to sit down for a minute. There's something on your back that, well, it's quite remarkable." Sarah's confusion deepened. She had always been self-conscious about her back because of some scars she had from a childhood accident, but she didn't understand why that would cause such a reaction from strangers. The scars weren't particularly noticeable, and she had never thought much about them. A middle-aged man who had been standing nearby stepped forward. He introduced himself as Dr. Robert Chen, a dermatologist who had been on his way to work when he witnessed the incident. "Miss, I'm a doctor, and I think you should know that what people are seeing on your back is quite extraordinary," he said carefully. "Would it be possible for you to come with me to my office? I think we need to take a closer look at this." Sarah was becoming more frightened by the minute. Everyone was being so serious and mysterious about whatever they had seen on her back. She began to worry that something was seriously wrong with her health. The teenagers who had started this whole situation were now standing off to the side, looking ashamed and worried. Jake approached Sarah hesitantly. "Look, I'm really sorry about what we did," he said sincerely. "That was completely wrong, and we shouldn't have touched you. But I think the doctor is right. You should probably get checked out." Sarah's mind was racing with possibilities. What could be on her back that was causing such a reaction? Was it something dangerous? Was she sick? She had been feeling fine that morning, with no signs of any health problems. The crowd was starting to disperse, but many people were still stealing glances at her as they walked away. Some were even taking pictures from a distance, which made Sarah feel even more uncomfortable. Dr. Chen waited patiently while Sarah tried to process everything that was happening. He could see that she was scared and confused, and he wanted to help her understand the situation without causing more distress. "Miss, I want to assure you that from what I can see, this doesn't appear to be anything harmful to your health," he said gently. "But it is something quite unusual, and I think you deserve to understand what's happening." Sarah looked around at the remaining faces in the crowd, all of them watching her with mixtures of curiosity, concern, and amazement. She realized that she wasn't going to be able to go to work and pretend this had never happened. Whatever was on her back had clearly made quite an impression on everyone who had seen it. Finally, she nodded to Dr. Chen. "Okay," she said quietly. "I think I need to know what's going on." As they walked toward his office, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that this moment was going to divide her life into two parts, before and after this strange Tuesday morning when a group of teenagers' cruel prank had revealed something about her that she didn't even know existed. The library where she worked was just a few steps away, but it felt like she was leaving behind the simple, quiet life she had always known and stepping into something completely unknown and potentially life-changing. Dr. Chen's office was located just 3 blocks from where the incident had occurred. As they walked, Sarah noticed that people on the street were still staring at her, even though her back was now covered. Word seemed to be spreading quickly through the downtown area about what had happened. The doctor's office was modern and clean, with comfortable furniture and calming artwork on the walls. Dr. Chen led Sarah to a private examination room and offered her a cup of water, which she accepted gratefully. Her hands were still shaking from the morning's events. "Before we proceed, I want you to know that everything we discuss here is completely confidential," Dr. Chen assured her. I also want you to understand that from my brief observation outside, I don't believe there's anything medically concerning about what I saw. But it is something that I think you should be aware of." Sarah nodded, though her anxiety was still running high. She had been trying to remember if she had noticed anything unusual about her back recently, but she couldn't think of anything. She rarely looked at her back in the mirror, and she usually wore clothing that covered it completely. Dr. Chen asked for her permission to examine her back properly, explaining that he would need her to remove her sweater and that a female nurse would be present during the examination. Sarah agreed, though she was nervous about what they might find. When the examination began, Dr. Chen's reaction was immediate and unmistakable. He stood silent for several long moments, studying her back with intense concentration. The nurse, Maria Gonzalez, who had been working with Dr. Chen for over 10 years, gasped audibly when she saw what they were looking at. "Miss Martinez," Dr. Chen said slowly, "what I'm seeing on your back is truly extraordinary. Have you ever noticed any unusual markings or patterns on your skin?" Sarah shook her head. "I have some scars from when I fell off my bike as a kid, but nothing unusual." "What exactly are you seeing?" Dr. Chen moved closer, using a magnifying glass to examine the patterns more carefully. "What appears to be on your back are markings that look remarkably like ancient symbols or hieroglyphics. They're not tattoos, and they don't appear to be any kind of artificial marking. They seem to be natural pigmentation patterns in your skin." The nurse, Maria, had been taking photographs with a medical camera to document what they were seeing. She had been working in dermatology for years, but she had never encountered anything like this before. "The patterns are incredibly detailed and precise," Dr. Chen continued. "They appear to form what looks like text or symbols arranged in specific formations across your upper and lower back. The pigmentation is slightly darker than your natural skin tone, but it's clearly part of your skin itself, not something that was added later." Sarah felt a wave of disbelief wash over her. "That's impossible. I would have noticed something like that. My family would have said something when I was growing up." Dr. Chen asked her to think carefully about her childhood and whether anyone had ever mentioned anything unusual about markings on her back. Sarah tried to remember, but she was certain that nothing like this had ever been discussed. "Is it possible that these markings appeared recently?" she asked. "Based on the depth of the pigmentation and the way it's integrated with your skin cells, I would say these markings have been there for a very long time, possibly since birth," Dr. Chen replied. "But there are cases where certain skin conditions or genetic traits can become more pronounced over time." The nurse showed Sarah the photographs they had taken, and, for the first time, Sarah could see what everyone had been staring at. Across her back were intricate patterns that did indeed look like ancient writing or symbols. The markings were beautiful in their complexity, with flowing lines and geometric shapes that seemed to tell a story. "I don't understand," Sarah said, staring at the images. "How is this possible? How could I have lived 28 years without knowing this was on my back?" Dr. Chen sat down across from her, his expression thoughtful. "There are several possibilities. First, the markings might have been much fainter when you were younger and have become more pronounced over time. Second, it's possible that your family did notice them but chose not to discuss them for some reason. And, third, there's a chance that you simply never had reason to examine your back closely enough to notice them." Sarah thought about her childhood and her family. Her parents had died in a car accident when she was 18, and she didn't have any siblings or close relatives. If they had known about these markings, they had taken that knowledge with them. Dr. Chen suggested that they consult with some colleagues who specialized in unusual dermatological conditions. He also recommended that Sarah consider reaching out to experts in ancient languages and symbols to see if the markings could be translated or identified. "But what does this mean for my health?" Sarah asked, which was her primary concern. "From a medical standpoint, these appear to be completely benign," Dr. Chen assured her. "They're simply an unusual form of skin pigmentation. However, given how rare and unique this appears to be, I think it would be valuable for the scientific community to study this phenomenon." As Sarah was getting dressed, her mind was racing with questions. How had she gone her entire adult life without knowing about these markings? What did the symbols mean? And, most importantly, how was she going to deal with the fact that her private life had just become very public? When they returned to the main office, Dr. Chen's receptionist informed them that there had been multiple phone calls from local news stations asking about the incident downtown. Word was spreading quickly, and people were curious about what had been revealed on Sarah's back. Dr. Chen assured Sarah that he would not speak to any media without her permission, but he warned her that the incident had been witnessed by many people, and some of them had taken photos and videos. I think you should prepare yourself for the possibility that this is going to attract significant attention, he said gently. What you have on your back is truly unique, and people are naturally curious about unusual phenomena. Sarah felt overwhelmed by the implications. She was a private person who valued her anonymity, and the thought of becoming the center of public attention was terrifying. As she was leaving Dr. Chen's office, her phone started buzzing with notifications. Her supervisor at the library had called several times, apparently having heard about the incident from co-workers who had witnessed it. There were also missed calls from numbers she didn't recognize. Walking back toward her apartment, Sarah noticed that people on the street were looking at her differently now. Some seemed to recognize her from the morning's incident, while others appeared to be looking for signs of whatever had caused such a commotion. When she reached her building, she found a news van parked outside and a reporter waiting near the entrance. The reporter approached her immediately. "Excuse me, are you Sarah Martinez? We understand you were involved in an unusual incident this morning. Could we ask you a few questions about what was discovered on your back?" Sarah hurried past the reporter without responding and rushed up to her apartment. Once inside, she immediately went to her bathroom and used a hand mirror to try to get a better look at her back. Even with the limited view she could achieve with the mirrors, she could clearly see the dark markings that covered a significant portion of her back. She sat on her couch, trying to process everything that had happened. In the span of a few hours, her quiet, predictable life had been turned completely upside down. She had learned that her body carried mysterious symbols that she had never known existed, and, apparently, the whole city was talking about it. Whiskers, her cat, seemed to sense her distress and climbed onto her lap, purring softly. Sarah stroked his fur absently while staring at the photos Dr. Chen had given her of her own back. The symbols were undeniably beautiful and intriguing. They covered most of her back in an organized pattern that suggested intentional design rather than random markings. Some of the symbols looked familiar, as if she had seen them somewhere before, but she couldn't place where. As evening approached, Sarah realized she was going to need help dealing with this situation. She couldn't hide from the world forever, and she needed to understand what these markings meant and why they were on her body. She decided to start by doing some research online to see if she could find any information about similar markings or symbols. What she discovered in her initial searches would open up possibilities she had never considered and lead her down a path she never could have imagined. Sarah spent the entire evening researching online, comparing the symbols on her back to various ancient writing systems and languages. She found some similarities to Egyptian hieroglyphics, ancient Sanskrit, and even some Native American pictographs, but nothing was an exact match. By the next morning, the story had spread far beyond the local area. Social media was buzzing with posts about the mystery symbols that had been discovered on a woman's back in downtown. The teenagers who had originally caused the incident had posted their video online, though they had blurred Sarah's face to protect her privacy after realizing the seriousness of what they had revealed. The video had gone viral, with millions of views and thousands of comments from people trying to interpret the symbols or sharing similar stories of unusual body markings. Experts in ancient languages, archaeologists, and even conspiracy theorists were weighing in with their opinions about what the markings might represent. Dr. Chen called Sarah early in the morning to inform her that he had been contacted by researchers from several universities who were interested in studying her case. He had also heard from the Smithsonian Institution and National Geographic, both of which wanted to document the phenomenon. "I know this is overwhelming," Dr. Chen said during their phone conversation. "But I think you should know that what you have is being considered potentially groundbreaking by experts in several fields. Some of the linguists who have seen the images believe the symbols might represent an unknown ancient language or writing system." Sarah felt torn between her desire for privacy and her growing curiosity about what the symbols meant. She had always been interested in history and ancient cultures through her work at the library, but she had never imagined she might be personally connected to such mysteries. That afternoon, Sarah received a call from Dr. Elizabeth Warren, a professor of ancient languages at Columbia University. Dr. Warren explained that she had seen the images of Sarah's markings and believed they might be related to a pre-Columbian writing system that researchers had been trying to decipher for decades. Miss Martinez, I understand this situation is difficult for you, but I believe your markings could provide crucial information about an ancient civilization that we know very little about, Dr. Warren said. Would you be willing to meet with our research team? We could offer you complete anonymity if you prefer. Sarah agreed to meet with Dr. Warren the following week. In the meantime, she decided to take some time off from work to deal with the situation and try to learn more about her family history. She started by going through her parents' belongings, which she had stored in her apartment after their death. She had never thoroughly examined many of their personal items, but now she was looking for any clues about her background or possible heritage that might explain the markings. In her mother's jewelry box, Sarah found a small pendant that she had never paid much attention to before. Looking at it more closely, she realized that it contained symbols very similar to the ones on her back. The pendant appeared to be quite old, and there was an inscription on the back that read, "For our beloved daughter, may she carry the wisdom of her ancestors." This discovery led Sarah to contact her mother's sister, Aunt Rosa, who lived in New Mexico. Rosa was the only surviving relative Sarah had any contact with, though they rarely spoke. When Sarah called to ask about the pendant and any family history related to unusual markings or symbols, Rosa's reaction was surprising. "Oh, Nija," Rosa said with a sigh. "I wondered when this day would come. Your mother made me promise never to tell you about this unless you discovered it yourself." Rosa explained that Sarah's family had roots in an indigenous Mexican community that had maintained ancient traditions and knowledge for centuries. According to Rosa, certain children in their family line were born with sacred markings that were believed to indicate special spiritual gifts or responsibilities. "Your mother had similar markings, though not as extensive as yours," Rosa revealed. "The elders in our village said she was chosen to carry the old knowledge, but she left for the city before she could complete her training. She was afraid of the responsibility and wanted a different life." This revelation changed everything for Sarah. She wasn't just dealing with an unexplained medical phenomenon, she was apparently connected to an ancient cultural tradition that her own mother had hidden from her. Rosa invited Sarah to visit her in New Mexico and meet with some of the elders who still remembered the old traditions. "They might be able to help you understand what your markings mean and why you have them," she said. While Sarah was processing this family revelation, the media attention continued to grow. She had been forced to change her phone number due to constant calls from reporters and researchers. News vans regularly appeared outside her apartment building, and she had to use the back entrance to avoid being photographed. The library where she worked had become a tourist attraction, with people hoping to catch a glimpse of this symbol woman. Sarah's supervisor had been understanding about her need for time off, but the disruption to the library's normal operations was becoming problematic. Dr. Warren arrived in town earlier than planned, accompanied by a team of linguists, anthropologists, and medical researchers. When Sarah met with them, they presented her with preliminary findings about her markings that were both exciting and overwhelming. "What you have on your back appears to be a form of pictographic writing that predates many known writing systems," Dr. Warren explained. "We've identified several symbols that seem to relate to astronomical phenomena, seasonal cycles, and what appear to be spiritual or ceremonial concepts." The research team had used advanced imaging techniques to create detailed maps of all the symbols on Sarah's back. They had identified over 200 individual markings arranged in complex patterns that suggested sophisticated knowledge of mathematics, astronomy, and possibly medicine. "Some of these symbols match markings we've found on ancient artifacts from Central and South America," another researcher, Dr. James Foster, added. "But we've never seen them in such a complete and organized form. Your back essentially contains what appears to be a comprehensive text or codex." The researchers explained that they believed Sarah's markings might represent a form of human documentation used by ancient peoples to preserve important knowledge. In cultures that had no written language, important information was sometimes recorded on the human body through tattoos, scarification, or in rare cases, natural pigmentation patterns like Sarah's. "We think what you're carrying might be a type of living library," Dr. Warren said. Ancient peoples may have used individuals with these markings as repositories for crucial cultural, spiritual, or scientific knowledge. This explanation aligned with what Aunt Rosa had told her about the family traditions. Sarah was beginning to understand that her markings weren't just unusual skin pigmentation, they were potentially a direct link to ancient knowledge and wisdom that had been passed down through generations of her family. The research team requested permission to conduct more extensive studies of Sarah's markings, including high-resolution photography, 3D mapping, and comparison with archaeological artifacts. They also wanted to collaborate with anthropologists familiar with indigenous Mexican and Central American traditions. Sarah agreed to participate in the research, but she set strict conditions about her privacy and the use of any information they discovered. She was beginning to realize that her situation was much bigger than she had initially understood, and she wanted to make sure she maintained some control over how her story was told. As the week progressed, Sarah received messages from people around the world who claimed to have similar markings or family traditions related to sacred body symbols. Some of these communications seemed genuine, while others appeared to be from people seeking attention or trying to connect themselves to the growing mystery surrounding her story. One message that particularly caught her attention came from a professor at the University of Mexico City who specialized in pre-Columbian cultures. He claimed to have ancient documents that referenced individuals who carried the marked wisdom and suggested that Sarah might be part of a specific lineage that had been thought to be extinct. These revelations were forcing Sarah to reconsider everything she thought she knew about herself and her place in the world. She was no longer just a quiet librarian living a simple life. She was apparently the bearer of ancient knowledge and the descendant of a sacred tradition that stretched back centuries. The weight of this responsibility was both thrilling and terrifying. Sarah realized that her life would never be the same, and she would need to decide how to use this newfound knowledge and attention in a way that honored both her own needs and the potential historical significance of what she carried on her back. 3 months after that fateful Tuesday morning, Sarah's life had transformed in ways she never could have imagined. The quiet librarian who once preferred blending into the background had become an internationally recognized figure in the fields of archaeology, anthropology, and ancient studies. Sarah decided to accept Aunt Rosa's invitation and traveled to New Mexico to meet with the elders from her mother's ancestral community. The journey proved to be both enlightening and emotionally challenging, as she learned about the rich cultural heritage that her mother had chosen to leave behind. The village where Rosa lived was small and surrounded by desert landscape that seemed to stretch endlessly in all directions. The community had managed to preserve many of their traditional ways despite centuries of outside pressure and modernization. When Sarah arrived, she was welcomed by a council of elders who had been waiting to meet her for months. The eldest member of the council, a woman named Grandmother Elena, examined Sarah's markings with great reverence and recognition. Through Rosa's translation, Elena explained that the symbols on Sarah's back were part of an ancient knowledge system that had been used by their people for over 1,000 years. "Your markings tell the story of our people's connection to the cosmos," Elena said, tracing some of the symbols with her finger. "They contain information about the cycles of the earth and sky, the properties of healing plants, and the spiritual practices that keep our world in balance." Over the course of a week, the elders worked with Sarah to interpret many of the symbols on her back. They revealed that her markings contained a comprehensive guide to their traditional calendar system, which was far more complex than any European calendar and included information about optimal times for planting, harvesting, healing ceremonies, and spiritual practices. Some of the symbols represented star maps that showed the positions of celestial bodies during significant times of the year. Others contained detailed information about medicinal plants and their uses, including combinations and preparations that had been lost to time in many other indigenous communities. "Your mother was meant to learn these things and pass them on to you," Rosa explained. "But she was frightened by the responsibility and chose to live in the modern world instead. The knowledge remained with you anyway, written on your body where it could not be lost." The elders explained that in their tradition, individuals born with these markings were considered sacred guardians of ancient wisdom. They were trained from childhood to interpret and preserve the knowledge contained in their markings, ensuring that vital cultural information would survive even if written records were destroyed. Sarah learned that her markings were not just decorative symbols but actually represented a sophisticated information storage system. Different areas of her back contained different types of knowledge, organized in a logical pattern that made it possible to read the information systematically. During her stay in New Mexico, Sarah also met with other community members who shared stories about relatives who had carried similar markings. She discovered that there were still a few other individuals in various parts of Mexico and Central America who bore fragments of the same knowledge system, though none as complete as what was written on her back. When Sarah returned from New Mexico, she brought with her a new understanding of her role and responsibilities. She had decided to work with the research team to document and preserve the knowledge contained in her markings, but she was also committed to ensuring that the indigenous community that had preserved this tradition for centuries would be properly credited and involved in all research. Dr. Warren and her team had made significant progress in deciphering the symbols during Sarah's absence. They had identified mathematical concepts that were surprisingly advanced, including astronomical calculations that showed understanding of planetary cycles and stellar movements with remarkable accuracy. What's extraordinary is that this knowledge system seems to integrate multiple disciplines that we typically study separately, Dr. Warren explained. Your markings contain information about astronomy, mathematics, medicine, ecology, and spiritual practices all woven together in a comprehensive worldview. The research had attracted attention from institutions around the world. The Smithsonian Institution offered to create a permanent exhibit featuring Sarah's story and the knowledge system contained in her markings. National Geographic wanted to produce a documentary about her discovery and its implications for understanding pre-Columbian civilizations. Several universities offered Sarah positions as a research fellow or consultant, recognizing that she had become one of the world's few living repositories of ancient indigenous knowledge. The irony was not lost on Sarah that she, who had spent her career helping people access information in books, had become a living book herself. However, the attention also brought challenges. There were people who questioned the authenticity of her markings, suggesting they might be elaborate tattoos created for publicity. Others tried to appropriate her story for their own purposes, claiming connections to her lineage or attempting to profit from the interest in her case. Sarah had to hire a lawyer to help her navigate the complex issues of intellectual property, cultural heritage rights, and media management. She was determined to ensure that any commercial benefits from her story would support the indigenous communities that had preserved the knowledge system for so many generations. The teenagers who had originally caused her humiliation had become unlikely allies in protecting her privacy. Jake, the former ringleader, had been so affected by the discovery that he became one of Sarah's most vocal advocates, using his social media presence to educate people about respecting indigenous cultures and opposing those who tried to exploit Sarah's situation. As the months passed, Sarah found herself taking on the role of cultural ambassador and educator. She gave lectures at universities about the sophisticated knowledge systems of pre-Columbian peoples and the importance of preserving indigenous wisdom. She worked with museums to ensure that exhibits about her discovery accurately represented the cultural context of her markings. The most meaningful aspect of her new role was the connection she had developed with indigenous communities throughout the Americas. She became a bridge between ancient traditional knowledge and modern academic research, helping to ensure that indigenous voices were heard and respected in scholarly discussions about their own cultural heritage. Sarah also discovered that her markings continued to reveal new information as researchers developed better techniques for analyzing them. Advanced imaging technology revealed layers of symbols that were not visible to the naked eye, suggesting that the knowledge system was even more complex than initially understood. The medical community became interested in studying how such detailed natural pigmentation patterns could exist and whether similar phenomena might be found in other populations. This research led to new understanding about genetic markers and hereditary traits in indigenous populations. One of the most surprising developments was the discovery that Sarah's markings seemed to change slightly with the seasons, becoming darker during certain times of the year and lighter during others. This discovery aligned with information the elders had shared about the living nature of the traditional knowledge system. The markings are not just static information, Grandmother Elena had explained. They are meant to be alive and responsive to the natural cycles of the world. That is how the ancestors ensured that the knowledge would remain relevant and accurate. As the first anniversary of her discovery approached, Sarah reflected on how completely her life had changed. She was no longer the anonymous librarian who preferred staying in the background. She had become a public figure with responsibilities to academic institutions, indigenous communities, and the broader public who were fascinated by her story. The transformation had been challenging, but Sarah had come to understand that it was also deeply meaningful. She was carrying on a tradition that stretched back hundreds of generations, preserving knowledge that might have been lost forever if it had not been written on her skin. Her small apartment had been replaced by a larger space that could accommodate the constant stream of researchers, community members, and students who came to learn from her. Whiskers, her cat, had adapted well to the busier environment and seemed to enjoy the attention from visitors. Most importantly, Sarah had found a sense of purpose and connection that she had never experienced in her quiet previous life. She was no longer just living for herself. She was serving as a guardian of ancient wisdom and a bridge between cultures and time periods. The incident that had begun as a humiliating prank by thoughtless teenagers had ultimately revealed Sarah's true calling and connected her to a heritage she had never known existed. Her back, which had once been a source of embarrassment due to childhood scars, had become a sacred text that held keys to understanding human knowledge and wisdom that stretched back through millennia. As she prepared for her next lecture at the United Nations about the importance of preserving indigenous knowledge systems, Sarah smiled at the irony of how much her life had changed. The woman who had once hidden in the shadows had become a beacon of light, helping to illuminate ancient wisdom for the modern world. The markings on her back were no longer just symbols, they were a living testament to the resilience of human knowledge and the unbroken chain of wisdom that connects all generations. Through her story, Sarah had become proof that the most profound discoveries often come from the most unexpected circumstances, and that sometimes what we think of as misfortune can actually be the beginning of our greatest purpose.